All right, welcome everybody. This is Billy Glidden here at the Fatal Vision podcast, joined as always by James McGinnis.
Welcome.
Yeah, and this is a very special episode because we have one of our writer heroes here, the great Gene Weingarten, acclaimed journalist and humorist, best known for his long tenure at the Washington Post, two-time winner of the Pulitzer Prize for feature writing, currently running a great Substack called The Gene Pool. We'll provide links to all this stuff in the episode description. And for our purposes, notably, he wrote about the 2012 evidentiary hearing in the Washington Post in an incredible piece of journalism that Joe McGinnis often pointed to as the ideal entry point for the case. Gene also wrote an amazing tribute to Joe McGinnis on his passing in 2014. We're going to talk about all of that, but just so honored, Gene, that you are taking the time to hang out with us. And I can say I've enjoyed emailing with you the past couple of weeks, getting your getting all even if you didn't know who I was or why you were emailing me, it was still fun for me.
Well, great to be here.
Yeah, welcome.
So, Gene, what was your first exposure to this case?
Oh, my first exposure to this case was when I was 18 and heard about the murders on the radio, um, and instantly said to myself, "Oh, he's guilty. He did it." And the reason was that at the time I was a drug-addled college student at NYU. Um, kind of a classic hippie drug user. And as soon as I read what MacDonald said the murdering intruders chanted, I knew that that was a figment of his imagination. There was no respectable murderous hippie around in 1970 who would ever chant anything like that. So literally, from the moment I heard about the murders, I felt I knew that he was the guilty party.
And
Wow. Yeah, go ahead, James.
then it probably escaped your consciousness for a number of years, like it did for my dad. I know it did for my dad for 9 years.
Yeah, I would say so.
Did you have any awareness of when he actually ended up being indicted and brought to trial? Was that,
I was following it from a distance, but not
yeah,
not with a great passion.
sure,
Um,
sure.
and then I read Fatal Vision and suddenly was way back in the middle of it and tried to report and find out everything I could about everybody involved.
So that's starting in the 80s. So Fatal Vision comes out
Yeah,
in 1983. So you've been obsessed with this case for quite a long time.
basically since 1987, which is when I first met Joe at Harvard, and we had dinner. The curator of the Neiman Foundation, I was a Neiman Fellow at the time, decided we two had to meet. And his name was Howard Simons, and he brought us together, and we sort of stayed together at a distance for the next many years.
Why did he think the two of you had to meet?
Because we think alike, we kind of write alike. We valued the same sort of uh, drama, and we knew how to tell uh, a narrative story with the proper amount of emotion and no bullshit. And we valued that. I was an editor at the time at the Miami Herald.
And that's that.
He saw I was the editor of a magazine called Tropic Magazine. It was the Sunday magazine of the Miami Herald, and we ran stories that aspired to be what Fatal Vision was all the time.
Wow. What was Fatal Vision? You describe it in the in your tribute to Joe in 2014. You say, um, we'll get into more of the of what the piece has to say, but you call it a great book, a fair book, Joe McGinnis's masterpiece. If you are a writer and you want a clinic in muscular storytelling, how it can and should be done, read Fatal Vision. Um, can you talk a bit about like what you mean by that? What's muscular storytelling and why? How does Fatal Vision?
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, First of all, Joe used words brilliantly, but that's basic. Any writer does that. He had the facility to persuade you, not with his own persuasive language, but by his selection. This is sort of the genius of storytelling to me. You make you don't state what the story is, you make it happen in the mind of the reader. And Joe was utterly brilliant at that. I remember, and again, as I told you before we began talking, I have not read the book in a long time. You and your listeners, viewers, are probably more familiar with it right now than I am, but my memory is that there's a point in this narrative where the trial is over. Joe is facing this huge challenge of what do I do with this now? He didn't expect, I think he didn't expect a conviction. How does he deal with that for the story? And he he goes to spend some time in MacDonald's house or apartment to get his papers together and his thoughts together. And the very first thing he says, again, to my memory, is he was amazed at how many mirrors there were
mhm.
in the house. And what he's doing there is setting the reader up, but in the reader's mind, not in his words, that, oh, this is going to be about a sociopathic narcissist, which is ultimately exactly what this was about. That takes real skill as a narrative writer to know how to do that. And that sort of blew me away. The other thing about the book, obviously, is that there is an internal narrative going on that is separate from the story of the trial and the murders and what have you. It is the story of Joe McGinnis gradually coming to an understanding. And so there's drama even in that. And I just think all of these things together made this just a phenomenal work. And, I found myself thinking, if you try to read an American tragedy today, it's this mannered Victorian thing that is almost unreadable. Joe's book was, to overuse an expression, it was a page turner from page one. He just knew how to tell a tale. And I think it will be as readable 100 years from now as it is now.
That's incredibly insightful. Yeah, the mirror stuff is in chapter one of the book. James and I
Oh,
reread
it
it.
is. It's right in chapter one. Oh,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
a throwback to after the trial, right?
Yeah. It's sort of a lead into the book. The whole book leads in with him the day they met, and then the going into his house and seeing uh, the Maserati and the
The
Mhm.
yacht.
mirrors, the yacht, and then going to the Golden Circle table party with the cream suit and everybody's kiss, like the police are celebrating him, and then he's going back to North Carolina and I'm going with him. And then that's the last you hear from Joe as a character for 500 pages or something, and then he just disappears and then he comes back
Right.
after the conviction, and
Yeah.
then goes to the condo and finds escatrol notes and all manner of things
Okay,
sort
but
of. Yeah.
that's not where he first mentioned the mirror. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was almost on page one or two of the
See
of the
how
introduction.
unreliable a witness I am? You can't trust anything I say here.
And the actual language is like they're like another portion of the wall has been given over to
Yeah.
mirrors. Like McDonald's just
Yeah.
obeying this pathology. Just
Right,
Yeah.
right.
just more and more of my wall must be covered with mirrors.
Yeah.
Gene, how do you think the voice of Jeffrey MacDonald chapters work to achieve this effect that you're talking about?
Oh, brilliantly. But, what I've always found fascinating is that people, any criticism of Joe seems to surround, Janet Malcolm's thing seems to surround the fact that in doing this, he was betraying the murderer. Um,
Hmm.
and it was betraying the murderer by not telling him earlier on when he was having serious misgivings, when he actually had persuaded himself that he was guilty, um, that MacDonald was guilty, that somehow this was a betrayal. And when you have an agreement, and I'm speaking as a journalist now, when you have an agreement with a source that essentially he will grant you great access, which is a gift he gives you. In return, you are seeing the story close to him. You'll be able to humanize him. You're giving him something back in return. So there's this sort of covenant between the two of you. It can be literally stated or it can be unstated, but it's obvious. The key point of that covenant is he can't lie. If the entire thing, any duties that you have to the other person are erased at the point that he is lying to you about something. In this case, the lie was transcendent. There can be no greater lie that MacDonald could have told McGinnis than that he was innocent. Uh, all bets are off at that point. And I can say that as a journalist and as an editor. You cannot expect any sort of um, trust to remain after that trust is violated. And whatever covenant you have is wiped out. I don't think Joe did anything wrong in, and I'll use the term stringing him along for a bit. His duty at that point was entirely to his book, and he fulfilled that brilliantly.
Yeah.
And when you read the book before Malcolm came along, did you never thought that this is the work of a great deception or anything like that, or
No,
did you? No.
no, I never thought that. And I didn't have a hell of a lot of respect for journalists who sort of backed up Malcolm, in
Yeah.
what you
Well, then,
say.
since it's come up now, why don't we get into that a little bit? So,
Yeah.
in your tribute to Joe in 2014, you begin this way. Joe McGinnis, author of one of the best nonfiction books ever written, died yesterday. I wrote that accolade in my head nearly 2 years ago on the day Joe first told me he had inoperable metastatic cancer. I felt it had to be said, and that for complicated reasons, no one else would say it in an obit. All that was missing was the date of death. And
Right.
the way you're setting that up, it's so elegantly done, and I'm always very moved when I reread it. Um, you seem to be saying here, though, that the Malcolm point of view has carried the day with a lot of folks, that this has to be said because no one else is going to be willing to say it. How do you figure that happened? Or
Uh,
is that your sense of it even now? Like,
yes.
has
Yeah.
not,
Even now, I believe that in the public mind, the unwashed public mind, not people who really know the case, but in the public mind, the story is about two things. It's about a murder and a journalist, and it's about Janet Malcolm's contention because uh, journalists like nothing more than to do agonizing appraisals and reappraisals of what they do. We're all narcissists. All journalists are narcissists in a way. And so her contention carried a lot of weight, especially because it was in the New Yorker. So everybody respects the New Yorker. And I don't think you can discuss the case anymore. I couldn't write my big story about it without devoting reasonable space to, was this a betrayal?
Right.
Right.
And that's, that's an unfair legacy for Joe to have. This was a story about a great book written about an incredibly dramatic murder and trial.
Yeah.
And you sort of and you could tell even in the climate 11 years ago that they were going to mention Malcolm first and
Oh,
foremost and
sure. Yeah.
every other obit, and then a brief survey will tell you that's what happened. And what I'm interested in is I think you ran a piece in your magazine sort of critical of Malcolm as shortly after it came out. I was reading it the other day, sort of an overview of everything. Maybe not you, but someone who was working for you wrote it.
Yeah, it was one of my best writers. His name was Joel Achenbach.
Mhm. Uh, and I found a lot of other sort of discourse around the time that wasn't buying Malcolm, and then something happened in the intervening 10, 20 years where she just became a saint and is indelibly correct in all regards, and at least when New York legacy media outlets are concerned. And whatever Morris did in his drive-by, we can talk about that later. But something you think it's because of journalism schools sort of adopted her as a prophet and sent
Well,
forth. Yeah,
it's a tantalizing question
yeah,
for journalists to ask themselves.
Mhm.
Are we all fraudsters? It's just fascinating. And, uh, there's some grain of truth to what she's writing, in that, the writer is in ultimate control of the story. And if you're a manipulator, you can manipulate the truth. I don't think that's done by most people. Um, and I certainly don't think it was done here.
Yeah, the
well,
Well, that's
let
example.
the
me.
other thing about
Oh, go
Fatal
ahead.
Frame. It's wildly persuasive of um, MacDonald's guilt. After reading that, um, I had no doubt exactly what had happened and why, and Joe nailed it.
Right.
Well,
So
when you met
Malcolm,
with him,
oh,
and
go ahead, Jim.
sorry,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll just quick question because we before we got into Malcolm, we were talking about when you met
Yeah.
my dad in '87. So that must have been. I'm sure you guys talked about the trial that he had either just come from or was just going to, and the civil trial. Do you remember discussing that with him at all?
I'm sure I did, but
Yeah.
I have an old man's memory. I can't tell you that. I can't see how we didn't discuss that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, one of the things that always sort of got to him was that he it was a self-inflicted wound because he went out and wanted lots of journalists to write about that trial and invited Malcolm in to our home to write about him, and then
Mhm.
it backfired immediately, obviously. So uh, I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but just that I guess you knew him at near the end of his life, and obviously I did too. And this case, and then the aftermath of Jen and Malcolm, shattered his psyche, um, to the point where he might have even been the amount of resentment and rancor he had for her followers and her was just unparalleled. I've never encountered anything like it before since. I don't know did you get that impression?
I did. He also was very blunt with me about uh, his mental troubles afterwards. Um,
Yeah,
so he understood that. And I don't need to tell you that he
sure.
understood that. He knew exactly what had happened to him, and I think felt justifiably embittered.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't think Joe deluded himself about anything about himself. And again, you'd know much better than I. But I just got the impression that he was on top of it, even if he was, for a period of time, out of control of it.
Yeah, and well, I think one of the things that was he was scared of before your piece came out, um, was that you were going to come down on Malcolm's side after all. Um, he was just it was like anytime anyone was writing about this case, and I remember
Yeah.
David Carr did a piece too around the same time. He's like, "You're just going to write about how right Errol Morris is because everybody fucking loves him." And
Hey,
so,
am I allowed to say shit on this
yeah,
podcast?
Yeah,
yeah,
we
clearly,
encourage you
yeah,
to, man.
yeah, please,
His
yeah,
book was full of shit.
yeah,
Errol
Just,
Morris's book, yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
I know. Yeah, no. No, let's go back to and discuss how shitty Joe's book. Now, I was stunned at how shoddy that book was. And it was shoddy enough so that even in the interview I did, I think Morris and I talked for about an hour and a half on the phone before the
Hmm.
story came out. Even during that time, I was telling him things that he said, "What, really?" This is a guy who had written an entire book on this subject, and he didn't know that the stiletto wound that MacDonald self-inflicted was not a millimeter from the heart. It was on the right side of his chest, a good fist's breadth away from his heart. And he had to go and look it up and call up the picture of the incision wound and say, yeah, it is on the right side of the chest. So,
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
should not have happened. During the evidentiary hearing, he was there,
Yeah.
and I, I met outside. And my story hadn't come out yet, obviously. And I told him, this is going to sound silly to you, but the whole case seemed to hinge on that pajama top that was sliced in a way that could not be duplicated in any other way. And he said, no, it could be duplicated in a million ways. And I said, well, I I took a piece of paper and folded it on itself and inflicted on it X number of stab wounds. And I did this 20 times in my house, and each time tried to refold it in a way where all of the holes were accounted for, because it was something like 26 holes and 37 holes with 26 knifing, so something like that. So the, the thing was doubled back on itself in a certain way. And he said, yeah, I know that whole thing gave me big pause. But the more I thought about it, what makes more sense? That MacDonald did this and then was stupid enough to stab her through his own pajama top? Or that this, in fact, meant nothing? And I said, well, it's much more believable that he was stupid enough to do this through his own pajama top. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and then he made another one. Seems very logical to me. And so I don't know. Did
And
I get
you're
any of the
saying,
facts
yeah,
there wrong?
What's that?
Did I get any of the facts there wrong?
no,
Yeah,
that was
those were
all
all
right.
accurate.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
very much. Yeah, I haven't read Morris's book, and I don't think I ever could if I tried.
It'll infuriate you. I can just imagine wait, when that book came out, your dad was still alive, right?
Yeah, it was actually
Yes, yeah.
came out sort
Oh,
of
yeah.
at the same time as the evidentiary hearing, and
Mhm.
his being there was kind of sort of a publicity stunt to sort
Yes,
of
it
like,
was.
I'm here, an innocent man is going to be freed, and it was very and then what was I remember we were you sort of I know you emailed with Billy about this, but there was all this sort of credit given to Morris everyone just sort of submitting to him, and the Times book review by Dwight Garner, and then this other fellow Evan Hughes, just sort of taking him at face value and just rejecting all other available evidence. And I guess I wanted to. Your piece sort of came out 3 months after his book came out, and then
Right.
did you ever hear from him again after that?
I did not hear from him again.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
I
Um,
mean, in terms of getting basic things wrong, and this is also in the documentary that Mark Smerling did,
Mhm.
where Errol calls up Ken Micah, who was the MP who saw the floppy hat lady.
Right.
And when Micah tells Morris that it wasn't Helena Stokely,
Mhm.
he can't believe it. He just he disregards that entirely.
As though, well, of course that's wrong. Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
it's like, how can you really know that it wasn't? So,
In
Well,
your
he also he's grasping at straws and literally grasping at threads.
Mhm.
When he finds it extremely suspicious that in this house where the murders took place, there were there was evidence of people other than the McDonald's having been in that place. There was hair evidence they couldn't, there was thread evidence that didn't match anything. This was a rental apartment that had been rented by dozens of families before. It would have been bizarre if there were no
yeah,
stray, but he needed to build a case, and so he
Right, but
asked
none of the hair, none of the threads could ever be traced back to Stokely or any of the accomplices Stokely named over the
And
years.
there was one hair that
Hmm.
was found in his wife's hands that could not be identified at the time of the initial trial because we didn't have the technology to do that. And so the prosecution, the defense made a big deal about what that hair was, and it could have been from the real killer. And finally, when when technology became good enough, they discovered what that hair was. It was Jeffrey MacDonald's hair. To the
yeah,
best of my memory, although he had this information, Morris did not put that in his book.
yeah. But I'm sure he put the unsourced hair under Kristen's
Yeah,
fingernail in there as a
he did.
DNA win for Team McDonald. What do
I
you
got
think the
something. I
patho
got
Yeah,
something,
go
James.
ahead,
I
Billy.
mean, so
Yeah,
one of the reasons that James and I decided to do this show is just we think about this case all the time, and we read coverage of it. We see little low effort YouTube things put out where people aren't thinking that hard about it. You see it even at the highest
My
levels.
dog
Like,
here, sorry.
hey, bud.
hey,
You see it even in the reviews of Morris in like the Times, where there's this credulity about it. Like, and in our emails before this, Gene, you were saying that what pisses you off is when anybody tries to present this as a balanced case.
yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
there's some of this and some of that. What accounts for this? In the
Okay, I'll tell you right away.
Go
I'll tell
ahead.
you what accounts for this.
Yeah.
Journalists account for this because number one, they always want to seem fair, even when um, even when both sides of an issue do not deserve equal treatment. But more important, the story of a man unjustly imprisoned for 40 years for a murder of his family he didn't commit is vastly more interesting than, yeah, the guy did it and he's still rotting in jail. So you want to sort of grasp at that straw to hold the public interest. It is not the high point of ethical journalism in America.
Yeah. You have anything else in mind? Yeah. Anyway,
Did I think you did at one point say that was one of Malcolm's greatest crimes is that she doesn't address guilt or innocence in her book or articles, and then sort of leaves it, makes it ambiguous, or gives people a pass to sort of say, who knows? He could have done it or he could not have done it. But we do know that Joe did a lot of bad.
yeah, well, I can actually just quote from Gene's piece here.
Yeah.
This is in his tribute to Joe. One of the main reasons that there is still doubt about Jeffrey MacDonald's guilt 44 years after the crime is the degree to which Fatal Vision was unfairly pilloried by Janet Malcolm and in a tisking generation of journalistic self-righteousness that followed. That
Yeah.
about sum it up?
Yeah. Also, she had some baggage.
Yeah,
That,
talk about that.
well, I'm afraid to because I'm not sure I remember it well enough. But she had been sued by a psychiatrist named Jeffrey Mason,
Mhm.
right? Am I remembering this right?
Oh
MASS.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
And he basically had proven in court that she made some stuff up, that she attributed quotes to him that she could not back up. And she won the case, as I recall.
yeah.
But she never wiped that stain away. And she had a chip on her shoulder and went after another journalist. Um, I also think she was very taken with Jeffrey MacDonald.
Yeah. No,
Taken with and taken by.
yeah. It,
Yeah, there's that passage about him eating powdered donuts and
yeah.
how tenderly he's
Yeah.
grasping them.
Another book I'll never read, other than excerpts, but yeah, and then she did go, I don't know, most people don't know this, but she went back to visit him in the 90s and wrote a really glowing, just sort of diary entry about what life in prison is like for him and how he's almost certainly innocent now, and that's sort of been washed wiped clean from the record. You can't find that article anywhere except
Yeah.
in the New Yorker archives. Um, but I remember when you were coming into this case in 2012, who, proponents of his innocence, people that thought it was a serious possibility of him getting out. One of them obviously is his second wife, Catherine.
Yeah.
Did you ever talk to her at all in
Oh
the
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, she she's still alive, right?
Hmm.
Oh yeah, yeah, very much
Okay.
so. Yeah. So is
Um,
he.
I don't want to say um yeah, so is he. Um I- she seemed to me to be um on the wrong side. I'll just tell you, I'll do what your dad would have done. She told me that even though she had never been alone with MacDonald in her life, alone in a room with him, it never happened. Um, and they'd never spent a night together or anything like that. She felt that they had the greatest possible relationship that a couple could have. And to me, this is not a particularly defensible or emotionally solid position for her to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something very sad about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt very sad for her. She had certain phrases that she would keep using to describe what an amazing guy he was, and it reminded me of those scenes in The Manchurian Candidate when 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 all of the former military colleagues of this guy had the same statement about how he was the kindest, gentlest, best man, and the same because they've been brainwashed to say that.
Yeah.
When we
I,
had Blackburn on back in
yeah.
September, I asked him if he thought that there was any kind of chance that was there a close call, or is it kind of a miracle that McDonald's never been let out like through all this bullshit? And he said, no, 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 the judges are good, and I never had lost faith that anyone would ever let him out. But I was wondering if in your research or talking to Brian, if you ever got the sense that if Brian wasn't around to sort of like be the steward of the evidence, that it could have gone another way. He might have skipped out on some bullshit new evidence.
Um, I definitely believe Brian felt and feels that way.
Yeah.
I think that he stayed with this case. I think he stayed employed. I think he would have retired earlier, except for the fact that he is the institutional memory for the government in this case. There is no one else who even comes close. You know, the very competent lawyer, the woman who helped present his case at the evidentiary hearing, she was born after the murder.
Yeah.
You know, and came to it quite late. They needed him, and they still need him. Although I think that MacDonald is out of his last appeal. I think he's in it till death, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
That was the last that hearing, and then Fox's ultimate ruling, and then his appeal of that ruling was the end. Once that they didn't, the
right.
Fourth Circuit wouldn't overturn that, and the Supreme Court wouldn't take it on. He's out unless someone else like a Jimmy Britt just emerges, out of the blue again. He's got to be some new evidence at this point.
Have
Well,
you
Because
gotten
now,
into that evidentiary hearing and how all the evidence was kind of disappeared in the testimony? You know, they would make this allegation and oh no,
yeah,
Jimmy Britt wasn't there.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was clear as a spectator that he had no shot of getting out at that hearing.
It was clear to me,
Yeah,
did that
at
seem
least on the basis of evidence.
yeah,
deflating for Morris? Did he seem really bummed out about it?
Morris was basically excited holding court outside the courthouse for anyone who was willing to put him on camera. You
yeah.
know, I watched this from afar and kind of laughed at it. He could not show and did not show disappointment. But
That's it.
clearly, he's a very smart man. He knew what was going on at that hearing,
It's very
and he knew what
interesting.
was happening to the evidence.
Well, people that know about my interest in the case often bring up the Errol Morris piece when they haven't read either of the books, but they just read the Wikipedia. They see that Errol Morris
Mhm.
wrote a book about it. And this does trouble people because he, like you said, he is a smart guy and he's made some great films and he's made
Yeah.
great contributions to the culture. So how has he been taken in by this shit? Did you get any sense of that? Or does he just want another thin blue line moment and it's motivated in that way?
I can't speak to his motivation, but if I remember correctly, he wanted to do a movie out of this.
Yeah.
He didn't intend to write a book, and he couldn't get backers for the movie.
Hmm.
So he had all this interest and some work that he'd done, and he put it into a book, and he wanted the book to sell, and the book made the case that would be the most saleable book. You know, he's not going to have a successful book saying, "Yeah, I think he did it too."
It's true. No,
That's not a winning strategy.
you can't just say this is Fatal Vision Redux.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to have a new spin on it. Uh, well, I don't know if almost nobody knows this because nobody, thank God, watches this channel, but McDonald's last remaining attorney, Hart Miles, was on the Newsmax network
Oh, yeah.
in February.
No, it was good reporting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had a full half hour on their 8 p.m. slot, which sort of saying it was all a conspiracy. And now will Trump please show compassion on this
Well,
poor
yeah, tying it to the deep state, tying it to, well,
yes.
the lawyer
The
didn't do
fake
that. The
no.
Newsmax host did that, tying it to the deep state and
Mm.
what they did to Trump is what they did to,
So Brian
Yes, and
Murtaugh is the deep state.
yeah, yes.
Murtaugh,
So-
Mike Wallace, and Joe McGinnis were the fake news.
Okay.
And they did it to Trump with his fake impeachment, and they're doing it now. They did it to McDonald. And then they took out this picture of him looking brain dead, very recent picture, brain dead and gaunt. And, we're just looking for compassion and relief on this man who's never wavered in his innocence. Uh, and then, oh yeah, then the thing that they brought up was that they begged Biden for a pardon in January and didn't get it. So Trump has the opportunity to right yet another one of Biden's wrongs. Uh, we were kind of panicked at the time because I thought it seemed like there was this big momentum was going to happen and maybe a PR blitz was underway, but there's been nothing else. So I don't even know if he is aware of it. It doesn't look like he knows what's going on outside of his jail cell at this point. So it might have just been Catherine and this gentleman Hart Miles sort of
Mhm.
like, can we get him out? And when I talked to Brian, he said, why would he want to get out? He has kidney disease and he has no money. He has no assets. He has no family other than Catherine. He's got everything he would want is in the Federal Bureau of Prisons.
I'm going to say something a little weird here, but is Mr. Stevenson, his wife's brother, still alive?
Hmm.
Yes.
He is. Okay, then MacDonald does not want to get out of prison because Stevenson will kill him, and he knows that.
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
saying this semi-seriously.
He
You have to talk to that guy. He's perfectly together. He's sane. He's logical, but he's. I wouldn't want to be McDonald if he gets out of jail.
I've always found him to
Probably
be
an
incredibly,
impolite
yeah.
thing to say, but it wouldn't shock me.
Yeah.
He was at the event. You met him, right?
Yep,
Bobby
I did.
Stevenson. Yeah.
Mhm.
He's kind of been off the radar. He dragged himself down to the compassionate release hearing in 2021 to give a victim impact statement.
Mhm.
So he's clearly taken his duty as the you know torchbearer after Freddie's passing very, very seriously.
Absolutely.
Uh,
I have
yeah,
nothing but respect for him.
me too. Um,
He will not give up on this because he will not give up on this. This is what he owes his sister, he thinks.
Yeah.
um,
This has been
if you,
great.
yeah, I know this has been, we could go all day, obviously. I don't have a natural wrap up question, Billy. Did you have anything?
I was thinking about just the kind of bigger picture, Gene, because you did you made a comment earlier about journalists wanting to appear fair and balanced, to borrow the
Yeah.
Ailes term, and but then what's on display in Fatal Vision, this kind of willingness to just get the story and get the facts out and lay it out. Is there anything for writers or journalists out there now to take from McGinnis's approach? Do we need more of that today? And what you're, I kind of know where you stand on a lot of what's happening today because I read your Substack and I'm right there with you. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on just
Yeah,
generally.
profession remains infected by the false equivalencies that we spew out in the interest of seeming fair. I think it's the job of journalists not to give every idea equal weight, but to research and live inside a story until you feel you know what the truth is, and then tell that truth. And that's muscular journalism. It's what Joe did and the thing that I admired so much and what I aspired to do in my own work.
Well, as a reader of Eugene, I can say that is what you do. That is why you're such a hero to us. And honestly, I've read a lot of your stuff. I've read the MacDonald piece like 50 times. It's perfectly executed. Even the part where you basically just chew and spit out the Malcolm argument in like a paragraph. You're like, so to be clear, I do intend to steer you toward a conclusion. It is
Yeah,
subtle
yeah,
and it's already begun. It's
yeah.
brilliant. It's just brilliant.
Well, thank
So
you.
everyone should read Gene Weingarten, and this has been a dream for James and me. I know
Yeah,
James holds you in such high regard as well. So,
Well,
of
it's been great
course.
talking to you. Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Thanks so much for making the time.
all
Yeah.
right, bye,
All
Gene.
right.
Bye-bye.
Stop the recording.
Thanks.